of the Almighty is relevantly absent from the scroll of Easter. When we are surrounded by pagans in the everyday non-miraculous world, when it looks like we are all alone and our search for the meaning and divine purpose of our life seems unfruitful, even when there appears to be no hope in surviving the plans of the enemy to exterminate and enslave the children of the Most High in their new world orders, He is there and He is not silent. In the scroll, the Megillah of Hadassah, or Easter, as she was known after she went in to be the bride of the king, we read in the very first chapter that after a 6-month world fair, then there is a 7-day elegant feast. And at the end of that feast, the king asks the queen to then come before everyone in the culminating event of the entire 6-month event. Vashti, the queen, disrespects the king, and so Vashti is vanquished. 3 years later, a global beauty contest is held, and after 1 year of preparation, then these young maidens are brought in before the king. And the one that the king desires, she will be the queen. It just so happens that a Jewish girl wins. And it just so happens that this Jewish girl, who has a cousin named Mordecai, happens to overhear of a conspiracy to assassinate the king, and he tells Queen Esther. Later, Haman, an Amalekite, now called Palestinian by the United Nations, is elevated to second in command and initiates a pogrom to exterminate all the Jews in a single day. He casts lots, Purim, casts lots, and it is going to be decided by blind chance the very day in which the Jews, helpless in the vice of fate, are going to be exterminated in one day. It just so happens that that date falls on the last month of the entire year. Well, just a couple of months later, the queen risks her life to make an appeal to the king. She does the right thing regardless of personal risk to herself. And at that audience with the king, instead of her being put to death for her presumptuousness, instead the king holds out the golden scepter and accepts her, and she makes a request to the king. And this request is that the king and Haman attend a wine banquet that she has prepared for them that day. At the wine banquet, the king then asks her, "What will you have? I will give you anything, even to the half of my kingdom." And she says, "Well, if you really will honor my request, then I ask that you come again tomorrow and to the banquet that I have prepared, and that day I will make my request known." Well, it just so happens that that afternoon, as Haman walks out of the banquet, being honored by the queen and the only one in attendance other than the king, Haman sees that Mordecai does not respect him. And so he goes home and builds a stake 75 feet high to publicly impale Mordecai. Well, just so happens that that night the king cannot sleep. And so he calls for the book of records. If anything's going to put him to sleep, it's going to be the book of records. And it just so happens that the book of records opens to the foiled conspiracy and the hero of this conspiracy to kill the king, which is Mordecai. Well, it just so happens that the next morning, Haman approaches the king to ask permission to impale Mordecai on his 75-foot gallows or impaling stake. But just before he opens his mouth, then the king says what should be done unto the one that the king desires to honor. And Haman, thinking that, oh, who would he want to honor more than me, comes up with the most elaborate plan, the most grandiose idea that anyone's ever thought of how to honor the person that the king desires to honor, thinking it's going to be him. Well, to his surprise, it just so happens that Haman is ordered to publicly honor Mordecai. Well, that afternoon at the second banquet, the chain of events will prove to all, and it will forever be remembered. In fact, a proclamation is going to be made at the end of this entire record that it will be forever remembered that he is there and he is not silent. Please open the Megillah of Esther to chapter 7, and we begin reading Hadassah, or Esther, chapter 7, verse 1. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. Now, just before this happens, when Mordecai is honored by Haman, Haman then immediately goes back and tells his friends, he tells his wife what had happened, and they say, you know, surely, they prophesied, surely you are going to fall before this man. And he is just absolutely wrenched with grief over the entire turn of events that have happened, that have all come upon him. He is the second in command of the entire empire, and his word is law. And yet Mordecai refuses to bow to him. Now he's had to honor Mordecai, and now he goes back and tells his family, and his family is saying, you're in big trouble. And right while this is being said to him, then the emissaries of the king come and to hasten him to bring him to the banquet. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. And the king said unto Esther the second day at the banquet of wine, what is your petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be given to thee. What is your request? It shall be performed even to the half of the kingdom. And the queen answered and said, if I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given to me at my petition, and my people at my request. For we have been sold, both I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to utterly perish. But if we just been sold for slaves, for bondmen and bondwomen, I would have held my tongue. Although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage, it would damage the entire empire. But if we were only sold as slaves, I wouldn't have said anything about it. Then the king, Ahasuerus, answered and said unto Esther the queen, who is he? Where is he? Who dares to presume in his heart to do this wicked, vile, disgusting thing, to take away my queen and Mordecai that I have just honored this very day? I have given him the greatest honor in the empire. Who is the one who has done this? Who has done this? And Esther said, that adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman! Then Haman was afraid before the king and queen. And the king, arising from the banquet of wine in his wrath, went out into the garden palace. And Haman stood up to make a request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against her by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden after having given this some thought. And as he returned into the place of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen upon the bed where Hadassah, Esther, was. Then the king said, is he going to rape the queen right in front of me, right in my own house? And just as the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. It's over. It's done. And Harbona, one of the chamberlains, said before the king, behold, look, you can see it from here. A gallows 50 cubits high, 20.62 inches. It is 75 feet high, which Haman had made for Mordecai. Mordecai, you know, the one that spoke good for the king, the one that stood up and exposed this conspiracy where they planned on killing you. This is the gallows, the impaling stake that stands in the house of Haman. Then the king said, hang him thereon, impale him. But I don't want you to just put him on top and set him on top. I want it to be slow this time. I want you to set him on top of that sharpened stake, 75 feet tall, in front of everyone where they can see this. And I want it to be slow. Don't set him down too hard. I want this to last for hours. So they impaled Haman on the impaling stake, on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. Just so happened, people, he is there, and he is not silent. Chapter 8, verse 1, on that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther, the queen. The house, everything that he owned, all of his wealth, all of his servants, everything that was left, it all belonged to the queen, and it was in her hands. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. This is my cousin Mordecai. He brought me up when my father and my mother died. He was the one that brought me up from a youth. And the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and he gave it to Mordecai. Now, Mordecai, which means little, insignificant, nothing of great stature, Mordecai was then set over the house of Haman by Esther, his cousin, gave him the house of Haman, all of his wealth, everything that he had. Esther, Hadassah, his cousin, didn't need it, and he now has the signet ring, and he is elevated to the number 2 command in the entire empire. And it says in verse 3, and Esther spake again before the king, and fell down at his feet, and besought him with tears to put away the devices of Haman, the Agagite, which means is of the royal line of Agag, who is an Amalekite, and his device which he devised against the Jews. Then the king held out the golden scepter to Hadassah, and she arose and stood before the queen. So she was back off at the time. She was pleading in tears before him. And this is the thing. We learn in the early chapters and from history that you do not go before the king and the emperor in a condition of being sad. He doesn't need your problems, okay? He's got his own problems in running the empire. And if a butler or a wine taster like Nehemiah coming before him and is a sad countenance, we see that Nehemiah was afraid because the king saw that he was of sad countenance, and it's not the king's job to take care of everyone's personal problems. That's the job of the chaplain. He said, go see the chaplain. Sounds like a personal problem to me. I don't need your personal problems. And so Nehemiah was afraid when he went in, and the king said, you're sad. Because he could lose not only his job, he could lose his head over this thing. The queen is crying, weeping at his feet, and he could have her executed for it again. But instead, he holds out the golden scepter, and she comes toward the king and stands before him. Verse 5, and said, if it please the king, if I have found favor in your sight, and the thing seems good before the king, and if I be pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews which are in all the king's provinces. Now, this commandment that was written, signed by the seal, the signet ring of the king, and so it has the authority of the king, and it is now the law of the Medes and Persians. It cannot be changed. Nobody can change it. The king can't even change it. Even though it was maliciously done, yet he has nothing he can do to change it. And now it's gone into all the provinces that on the 13th month of the day of the month of Adar, the 13th day of the 12th month, that is when everyone is going to be, all the Jews are going to be executed. Now we're in verse 6. How can I endure to see the evil that shall come unto my people? How can I endure to see the destruction of my kindred? Then the king said unto Esther the queen and to Mordecai, Look, behold, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have impaled him on his gallows because he desired to lay his hands on the Jews. Write also for the Jews as elects you, in the king's name, seal it with the king's signet ring, for the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, no man can reverse. Then were the king's scribes called. The king invites the scribes in. We're in verse 9 of chapter 8 here. And the king's scribes called at that time, it was the 3rd month. That is the month of Sivan, on the 23rd day. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and the deputies and rulers of the provinces, which were in India unto Ethiopia, even 127 provinces, 127 kingdoms in his realm. From Ethiopia to the Indus River in India, it's all his, all the way to, is it Sardis? That the Greeks came and burned, I believe it was Sardis, and that's what set Xerxes on the warpath against the Greeks. So all of this land, 127 empires. Okay? And it said, write into them in their language, and to the Jews according to their writing. And so now he's writing in the script that the Jews will understand. And we do not know at this point if this is still the Paleo-Hebrew or the modern-day Babylonian Hebrew that is done at this particular point in time. It could very well still be what we call a Paleo-Hebrew at this time. But in fact, there's no difference between Paleo-Hebrew and the modern Jewish script, except for the pictographs of the ancient Paleo-Hebrew. It is, if you take the Hebrew text, just in a Bible program, the Hebrew text, and you paste in a Word document, and then you change the font to Paleo-Hebrew, it's a one-to-one conversion. There's no difference. Those who say, well, the Paleo-Hebrew is pronounced this way, you know, whenever someone says that, you know they don't know what they're talking about, because nobody knows how Paleo-Hebrew was pronounced. It was Hebrew. It's just a font change. It's like the difference between Arial and Times New Roman, except it's quite a bit different there. And so you do have the ancient Paleo-Hebrew pictographs that are there in the ancient Hebrew that you don't have in the Babylonian Hebrew. But it is those, as a matter of fact, our tour every year, I take our tour up to Mount Gerizim. And we go into the home and the museum of the son of the high priest of the Samaritans. And Yafet actually reads from the ancient Paleo-Hebrew. All of the Hebrew that the scrolls are all written in, and all the books for the Samaritans still to this day are all ancient Paleo-Hebrew. But he can read modern Hebrew just as fluently because there's no difference. It's all done the same way. And it all has the same pronunciation by the Samaritans today. Whether it's written in modern Hebrew or ancient Hebrew, it's all the same pronunciation because this is the way they pronounce these particular letters. And so now we see that, you know, no matter what it is, whether it's Paleo-Hebrew, whether it is more modern Babylonian Hebrew, it really doesn't matter. It may have been in both, so to make sure that everyone could be communicated well with. And this is what was written. And he wrote in verse 10, in Ahasuerus' name, seal it with the king's ring, send it by letters, by post on horseback, riders on mules and camels and young dromedaries, wherein the king granted the Jews, which were in every city, to gather themselves together, and to stand for their life, and to destroy, and to slay, and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both the little ones and women, and to take the spoil of them for a prey. Upon one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, namely, upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar. And then it says in verse 13, the copy of the writing for a commandment to be given in every province was published unto all people, and that the Jews should be ready against that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the posts that rode upon the mules and the camels went out, being hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. Now, this is the 3rd month, and yet they need to get to the entire empire, because now it has been 3 months that the other order had gone out from the signature of Haman, and now it's getting around to all the kingdom. And people are hearing about this through the entire empire. Now it's 3 months later, and another post has to come out, because now to get to this far ends of the empire, to then allow the Jews to circumvent this order to exterminate them, they have got to get ready. They have got to be able to get the armaments and everything that they need to be able to protect themselves, because now they have an order from the king. They can arm themselves. They have the right to keep and to bear arms now, and to get ready against an assault from the outside and an assault from the inside. Because again, these are people in the empire, in the provinces, that are planning on taking the people out, because they see the advantage of wiping out all the Jews. And so, now that the Jews have the order and they can arm themselves, now they get ready. And so we will continue on. And the decree was given at Shushan, the palace. Verse 15, and Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel, of blue and white, and with a great crown of gold, and with a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad, because a righteous man is now in charge of the empire directly under King Ahasuerus. And so when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When evil is brought in and you have an evil person sitting in that seat of authority, then the people are greatly distressed and saddened, because a totalitarian government right around the corner, we see that Mordecai is one that does good and looks out for the welfare of his people and not out for the welfare of himself. We'll see that a little later in the text. And then in verse 16, and the Jews had light and gladness and joy and honor. People honored them. And in every province and in every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness. And they had a feast. It was a celebration and a good day, Yom Tov. And many of the people of the land became Jews, because the respect of the Jews fell upon them. And so we see quite a change in the empire, to where those who were not even Jewish said, you know, I want to be one of you. I want your God to be my God. I want your people to be my people. I want to attach myself to Israel. Now, chapter 9, verse 1. Now it is the 12th month. That is the month of Adar. It's the 13th day of the month that the king's commandment and his decree drew near to be put into execution, in the day that the Jews hoped to have power over them. The day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it turned to the contrary, that the Jews had power over those that hated them. Then the Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, to lay hand on such as sought their hurt. And no man could withstand them, for the fear of them fell upon all people. And all the rulers of the provinces, the lieutenants, the deputies, the officers of the king helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai fell upon them. Mordecai is second in command. If they don't stand with them, there are now going to be consequences to be paid for those who stand with evil. And so Mordecai was great in the king's house. Mordecai, which means little, insignificant. Now he is great in the king's house. And his fame went out through all the provinces. For this man Mordecai waxed greater and greater. The little man waxed greater and greater and greater. Thus the Jews smote all their enemies with the stroke of the sword, and with slaughter and destruction, and did what they would unto those that hated them. And in Shushan the palace, the Jews slew and destroyed 500 men. And the 10 sons of Haman, and I'm not going to read their names because I do not want to pay them any respect. I do not want their names to be remembered. I want them to be blotted out as Haman's name is blotted out. All of the Amalekites who stand against the people of God, may their name be blotted out. May Hitler's name be blotted out. And so the 10 sons of Haman, who was the son of the doubled, or Ha-Meditha, the enemy of the Jews, they slew. They killed them all, killed every one of the 10 sons of Haman. But on the spoil, they did not lay their hand. And we also see that this is a repeat of what we see with Abraham, came back from the slaughter of the kings. And the things that his men took, that was one thing. But Abraham said, I'm not going to take a thing. I'm not going to take any goods, any spoils, or anything from you, lest it be said that you've made me rich, because the Almighty is the one that is my provider. He's the one that takes care of me. And this is what the believers, the children of Abraham, can rely on to this very day, that we do not depend upon the world for our sustenance. We depend upon him. He is the one who's put in place his laws, and he's told us how to handle things, what to do with them. We see that at the end of this book that part of the celebration is to, at this point, to give to the poor, take care of those who have less or little, and to minister to the poor, the widows, the orphans. All these things are eternal rules that just never go away in the scripture. But they did not lay their hand on the spoil. They let other people take it, but they did not kill these people for the spoils. They killed them because they needed to be killed, because they were planning on murdering and killing them and taking everything that they had. And so they were the ones that took the stand and said that we are not going to lay our hand on the spoils of this very thing. It was on that day, Adar 13, that the number of those that were slain in Shushan, the palace, 500, was brought before the king. And the king said unto Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in Shushan the palace, and also the 10 sons of Haman. What have they done in the rest of the king's provinces? And so they immediately sent an email out. Right. That's a good question. You know, only those that are very nearby, that they could have someone on a horse or a swift dromedary get there, would they even know this? And it says, so what's your petition? And it shall be granted thee. And what is your request further? What shall be done? Because they really didn't have any idea what happened in the rest of the province at this time. Then said Esther, if it please the king, let it be granted to the Jews which are in Shushan to do tomorrow according unto this decree. And let Haman's 10 sons be hanged, impaled upon the gallows. Now we see an impalement that takes place after the bodies after the people are dead. And this is the very thing that we see in the time of Joshua, that they were hanged upon 10 trees, etz, which is the same word for gallows here, etz, which is an impaling stake. They hung the people after they were killed on an impaling stake as the dishonor, because, as it is written, cursed is everyone who is hanged upon a impaling stake, a tree, an impaling stake, a stauros in Greek, if you please. And so here it is. It is the ultimate in insult to take a dead body and then to impale them one after another. Now they're 11 deep. They've got Haman on the bottom, who's been impaled vertically from the seated position all the way through, coming out his mouth. And then you got his sons jammed one on top of another, all the way down on this gallows. And the king commanded that it be so done. Okay, go ahead. Impale the rest of his sons and let it be done in Shushan, because we can get the word out throughout the entire city of Shushan. And so they gathered themselves together on the 14th day also of the month of Adar, and they slew 300 at Shushan. But on the prey they did not lay their hand. But the other Jews that were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together. They stood for their lives. They had rest from their enemy and slew their foes 75,000 in one day. But they laid not their hands to the prey. On the 13th day of the month of Adar, and this is what they did on the 13th day. They killed 75,000 in the empire on that one day. Didn't take any of the spoils for killing these people who were gathered together to kill them, and that's an important point. They just didn't go out and start butchering everyone. The ones that came after them, they showed absolutely no mercy. You never show mercy upon the merciless, because if you do, then you are then not being merciful to the righteous. And so on the 14th day, 17th verse, and on the 14th day of the same, they rested. That's all of the rest of the empire. They made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews that were in Shushan assembled together on the 13th day and on the 14th day, and that's when they did their executing. So it was 500 the first day, it was 300 the next day, plus the 10 sons of Haman. And then on the 15th day of the same, they rested. They made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages that dwelt in unwalled towns made the 14th day of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, and Yom Tov, a good day, and of sending portions of gifts, Thanksgiving gifts, one to another. And Mordecai wrote these things, and he sent letters unto all the Jews that were in all the provinces of the king Achashverosh, both nigh and far. And so now this word goes out from Mordecai about this. And what is it? To establish this among them, that they should keep the 14th day of the month of Adar and the 15th day of the month of Adar every year. In verse 22, as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow to joy, and from mourning into a good day. And they should make them days of feasting and joy, and of sending portions to one another, and gifts to the poor. And the Jews undertook to do as they had begun, and as Mordecai had written unto them. Because Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had devised against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast Pur, that is, that cast the lot, that by pure chance it would be decided upon the day that they would be consumed and destroyed. But when Easter came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, now we're going back in time, and because this is the writing of Mordecai that is now going out to the entire empire, and saying that when Easter came before the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, that's Haman's device, should return upon his own head. and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. So he's letting everyone know that Haman, who is the most revered, the most respected one in the entire empire, when he came against the Jews, this is what happened to him. The king said, execute him, painfully, slowly impale him on this 75-foot gallows. Let everyone in the entire city of Shushan hear the screams for hours. And then after you kill his sons, then impale them. This is what the king determined should be done to these people. Therefore, they called these days Purim, after the name of Pur, which means lots, gambling, casting lots. Therefore, for all the words of this letter, and of that which they had seen concerning this matter, and which had come unto them, the Jews ordained and took upon them, and upon their seed, and upon all such as joined themselves unto them. See, again, this is those who, they're not by bloodline Israelites even. But yet they said, we want your God to be our God. This is such an incredible testimony. We see that, he is there. He's not silent. He's watching over his people. As Mordecai said to Hadassah, if you refuse to risk your life and go before the king, you make your choice. Because the Almighty's hand is not shortened, he is going to rescue his people no matter what he has to do. But you and your household is going to be destroyed. You're going to die. You're not going to get out of this thing. But the Almighty is going to make sure that his people are saved because he made a covenant with Abraham. All the land from the Euphrates to the Nile belongs to the sons of Israel. And any nation who stands against this will find themselves on the battlefield against the Almighty. He said, you choose. But who knows that you have not been raised up, that you are now the queen of the empire for such a time as this. And that is when Hadassah decided that if she dies, she dies. And this is what she said, if I die, I die. I'm going to do this. But you fast for the next 3 days and 3 nights. In verse 27, so the Jews ordained and took upon them and upon their seed and upon all such as joined themselves unto them. So it should not fail that they should keep these 2 days according to the writing, according to their appointed time every year. And that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province of every city. And that these days of Purim should not fail among the Jews, nor the memorial of them perish from their seed. And this is why we celebrate Purim every year. This is why it takes us weeks to get ready. And the teaching of this, so that everyone understands, because the Gentiles are welcome to be grafted into the root of Israel. And if they're not grafted into the root, if they are not supplied by the sap, the nourishment from the root, they will wither, they will die, they will be cut off, and they will be cast aside, and they will be burned. This is what Shaul says, okay? Paul. And we see that the Almighty has worked in this thing, and it is those people who decided we are going to do this and we're going to do it forever and we're always going to remember this. Because these are the times, ladies and gentlemen, that we need to remember these things. When evil is seated in the halls of power, when Haman is seated in the halls of power in the United States and getting his authority from those who put him there, and we see that no amount of evil is going to be withheld from those who are now in power in post-Christian America. We are living in this time again, and you have to decide if you are going to stand on the right side, if it will cost you your life, or if you're going to cower and submit and do, as Yeshua said, they, the believers, will hate and betray each other to death, because love will wax cold. Because the Torah is gone from their hearts and lives. And all they've got left is some feel-good, sloppy agape churchianity. Well, Verse 29, then Esther, the queen, the daughter of Abihail. So I guess we should now call her Hadassah. Everybody knows she's Jewish. Okay, so we can forego the Esther, the Babylonian goddess of fertility name. Then Hadassah, the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai, the Jew, wrote with all authority to confirm this second letter of Purim. And he sent the letters unto all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus, through all the empire of Xerxes, to confirm these days of Purim in their times appointed, according as Mordecai the Jew and Hadassah the queen had enjoined them. And as they had decreed for themselves and for their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry. Ladies and gentlemen, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, this is what we do as children of Abraham. Jews, Israelites alike, all who have joined themselves into the root and are children of Abraham by faith, keeping his commandments, this is something that we all decided we were going to do, and that's why we make it available for you to join with us. So our Purim celebration is for everyone, and we will be again broadcasting live and putting it out there for the world to join in our Purim celebration. And as they had enjoined them, and as they had decreed for themselves and their seed the matters of the fastings and their cry, and the decree of Hadassah confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the scroll. Chapter 10, verse 1, and the king Ahasuerus laid a tribute upon the land and upon the isles of the seas, because he was in charge, and he laid a taxation upon everyone. Everyone owed him allegiance. And all the acts of his power and his might, and the declaration of the greatness of Mordecai, whereunto the king had advanced him, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next unto King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews. The little man was great among the Jews, and accepted of the multitude of his brethren, seeking the wealth of his people, their welfare, not getting in everything in for himself. No, he was not like a senator or a congressman in there trying to milk it to death and to get a paycheck for the rest of his life for doing little or nothing for the welfare of the people. No. He sought the wealth of his people, and he spoke peace to all of his seed. Ladies and gentlemen, this is like the beginning of this. Because now what I'd like to do in our last few minutes is to take you into the book of Daniel, into the 11th chapter, into a prophecy that could not be figured out until both Purim and Hanukkah were put in place. And we're going to read in Daniel chapter 11 in verse 31. Armies shall invade on his behalf, and they shall pollute the sanctuary's strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that makes desolate. Now, historically, we know that 168 before the Common Era, that's what BCE, remember? BCE means before the Common Era, because it has nothing to do with AD or BC according to a Catholic priest understanding of when Yeshua's birthday was. Even the Pope himself said that that priest was wrong. So it's before the Common Era, 168, Antiochus Epiphanes went in with his troops and placed the abomination that made desolate. They slaughtered a sow, roasted it on the altar, and desolating the altar, placing that abomination at that time. But that's not the only time that it is going to be done in history. In Matthew chapter 24, it is Yeshua that says, therefore the end shall come when you see the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel, when he stands in the holy place. Whoso reads, let him understand. See, there is yet another abomination of desolation that is going to be transpiring in the future, of which the one of Antiochus Epiphanes is a prophetic shadow picture. 3 years exactly to the day, which was December 25th, also Kislev 25, in which the abomination of desolation was placed on the altar. The pig was sacrificed on the altar. 3 years later, it just so happens that that is a day that they took the Temple Mount. They then destroyed the brass statue of Zeus, who was born on December 25th, who was worshipped by the Greeks, and they broke down the altar and took over the Temple Mount. Later, they built a new altar. They dedicated it for 8 days. That's how long it takes to dedicate an altar, and that is why it's called Hanukkah, or dedication, literally dedicating the altar. That is what Hanukkah means, and that's what it's all about. Now, let's continue on with Daniel, though. Now we're back in verse 32. And such as do wickedly against the covenant. And what is this covenant that it's speaking of? It is the covenant that Abraham was made between the Almighty and Abraham. All the land from the Euphrates and out belongs to the sons of Israel. You don't give the land away, you don't sell it, you don't lose it in a war. You stand your ground. All that do wickedly against the covenant shall he corrupt by flatteries. But the people that know their God shall be strong and do exploits. The definition of the word exploits is that which would make James Bond cringe under his bed in the fetal position for fear. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword. They're going to be killed. Those that understand are going to be killed. And they're going to fall by flame and by captivity and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they will be helped with little help, but many shall cleave unto them with flatteries. That's why I don't give any ground to those who try to flatter, those who try to bribe, those who try to seduce, saying, oh, I'll give you money if you do it this way. I'll give you a bigger tithe if you do it that way. No, not going to go. Neither the flatteries nor the bribery. I will not be blackmailed. My ministry can't be blackmailed. People can try to steal from me. They can try to kill me, but I'm not backing down. So don't try it. And some of them of understanding shall fall to try them, to purge them, and to make them white even unto the time of the end, because the end is yet for a time appointed. And the king, in verse 36, shall do according to his own will. He'll exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished, for that is which shall be determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his father, nor the desire of women, neither regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Now this is almost directly, word for word quoted in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come. What day? The day of the Lord Jesus Christ, as it says in the King James, or Yeshua HaMashiach, our Lord, when he comes and gathers us together unto him. That day of our gathering together shall not come, except first there come, apostasia, the rebellious stand, and the man of sin revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, proclaiming he is God. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the abomination of desolation spoken by the prophet Daniel for the end times, of which Yeshua then reiterated. Passion dries the throat. Back to Daniel. Thus shall he do to the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And this is what's going on with the United Nations, with the United States, promising $1 billion to resettle the Jews who leave Gaza. But what happens while they are being forced out of their homes in the Gaza Strip after being there for 30 years, a no-name storm starts brewing. It hits the most religious city in America, New Orleans, and the United States never pays the $1 billion. You know where those Jews are today? They are still living in tents. They're still in squalor because the United States lied to Israel. The Almighty does not stand for that. You stand against His promise. And divide the land for your own gain, and He shall plant the tabernacle of His palace, or His command post, between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet shall His end come. And then, in chapter 12, we have just a short time. At that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which stands for the children of thy people. We read right here, we can go right straight to Revelation chapter 12. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought in his angels and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And then we go back in Daniel. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even at that same time. Yeshua quotes the very same thing. For then shall be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of time, nor ever shall be, and except those days be shortened, no flesh should be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days shall be shortened. And then back to Daniel, chapter 12. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. Many of them which are asleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to everlasting shame and contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, like the stars forever and ever and ever. That's why I say, people, we are not interested in the extras on the set. We're looking for the stars. Those who are going to shine forever. Not those who want to play religion. Not those who, want to, take a look at the narrow path that leads to life and then decide to go the way of religion. No, they are the extras on the set. Those are the ones that are going to be raised to everlasting contempt. We don't want to be in that category. There are a lot of people that do want to be in that category. Let them go. You can't do anything about those who are destined, who want to go to hell, who want to be raised to everlasting contempt, to be told, get out of my face, I never knew you. You who work anomia, those who are anomia, without Torah. You want to live your own life, you want to do your own thing, this whole life, and then at the end think that you got some kind of reward coming? Forget it. But thou, Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book even unto the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge will be increased. And then, here it goes, ladies and gentlemen. I heard the angel, clothed in linen, and he said, it shall be for a time, a times, and a half a time. The very same phraseology that's used in Revelation 12:6, that the woman flees in the wilderness and fed for a time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years. And then it goes on to say that, in verse 9, go your way, Daniel. The words are closed up and sealed to the end of time. And then, in verse 11, but I'll tell you that from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away, the abomination that makes desolate shall be set up. There shall be 1,290 days. Ladies and gentlemen, from Purim to Sukkot, in a 3.5 year period of time, a little more than that, because 1,260 days, prophetically, is 3.5 years. 1,290 days is from Purim to Sukkot. It's exactly 1,290 days. Blessed is he that waits and comes to the 1,335 days. From Aviv 10, which is the day the Passover lamb is paraded into the city of Jerusalem, the triumphal entry of Messiah, who said, I've not come in my own name, I've come in the Father's name, you haven't received me, there's one coming in his own name. Aviv 10, the anti-Messiah, makes his triumphal entry into Jerusalem. 1,335 days later is Hanukkah, the dedication of the Messiah's millennial temple. But he says, go your way till the end. You're going to rest and stand in your lot. See, we learn from Shaul that the feasts of the Lord are prophetic shadow pictures of good things to come. The mechanism whereby the Almighty tells the end of time from the very beginning. And these numbers that could not be determined beforehand, we see that from Tevet 3, which is right at the end of the 8-day Hanukkah dedication, From Tevet 3 to Purim is exactly 2,300 evening and morning oblations, 1,150 days. From Purim to Sukkot is 1,290 days. From Aviv 10, the abomination of desolation, to Hanukkah is 1,335 days. From Tishri 10, the confirmation of the covenant, to Aviv 10 is 1,260 days, or 42 months, or times and a half a time. And from Aviv 10, the abomination of desolation, to Tishri 10 is, again, which is Tishri 10, which is Yom Kippur, 42 months, 1,260 days, a times and half a time. See, before Hanukkah and Purim were put in place, these things could not be known. Daniel was told, forget it, you're going to be dead and in the grave before any of these come to pass. But yet the Almighty is in charge of the universe. What was done with the random toss of the coin, roll of the dice, or what have you, the Almighty was in charge at the time of Akashverosh. And he is in charge at the time of the Novus Ordo Seclorum, the one world government at the end of time, who has their plans on exterminating all freedom from the face of the earth and turning this world into a prison planet. But the Almighty has a plan. Babylon will be destroyed and the king will reign. I'd like to leave you with this blessing. Yivarechecha Yehovah v'yishmerecha. Yair Yehovah panav elecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Yehovah panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom. B'Shem Yeshua HaMashiach Sar Shalom. Yehovah bless you and keep you. Yehovah make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. Yehovah lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. In the name of Yeshua, the Prince of Peace. Shalom, Torah fans. Give this video a thumbs up and share it with a friend. Tap the subscription button and the bell icon. And I promise to update weekly with in-depth biblical research. Be sure to download the new michaelrood.tv app for both mobile and home devices for even more commercial-free content.